Recording started. Okay, 4:01. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Nate Drag. I'm the Great Lakes Literacy Specialist with New York Sea Grant. And you are here today on our Plastic Pollution and You introductory webinar to tell you all about a brand new resource from New York Sea Grant focused on plastic pollution from an interdisciplinary perspective to help your students, programs, and classrooms integrate a lot of cool activities focused on this subject. Slide. So just a quick agenda for the webinar today. We're going to start with introductions from the New York Sea Grant staff, as well as a map to show you guys where you're all joining from. Because even though this is a New York Sea Grant webinar, we have people joining from across the country. So that's awesome. We're going to do an overview of the entire curriculum. It's 15 different lessons, so we didn't have time to do every single one. But we want to show you those different activities. And then we're going to have our guest speaker, Dr. Sherri Mason, followed by breakout groups with the lesson demonstrations. And now we'll do some introductions.
All right, I'll take it over from here. So everyone, welcome. I'm so glad that you joined us. Just a quick introduction to New York Sea Grant. We are a cooperative program that is through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, SUNY, the State University of New York, and Cornell University. And what we do is provide research, education, and extension about various coastal issues throughout New York State, ranging all the way from Long Island to the Great Lakes. I will lead introductions real quick. I'm Kathleen Fallon. I'm one of the co-authors of the plastic pollution curriculum, and I am the coastal processes and hazards specialist located on Long Island at Stony Brook University. We also have with us today Jimena. Jimena, do you want to?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Jimena Perez Vizcasillas. I am the outreach coordinator in New York for the Long Island Sound City National Estuary Program. And like Kathleen, I am in Long Island in Stony Brook University.
Jimena, we also have Lily with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Genovese. I'm the outreach coordinator for New York City and Westchester County. And I work on the Long Island Sound City project for Sea Grant.
And I'm going to toss it back over to Nate now.
Hi, everybody. So like I said in the beginning, my name is Nate Drag, and I'm the Great Lakes Literacy Specialist for New York Sea Grant. And I'm located over in Buffalo on Lake Erie, and my territory covers New York's Great Lakes region from the Pennsylvania border up through the Thousand Islands. So that's our coverage of the New York Sea Grant team. I want to bring up a map of where all of the participants that registered for the webinar are located. And so 404, so I think people will still be logging in. But it's really exciting to have people joining from across the country on this issue. And you'll hear a lot about New York examples in some of our activities, because this resource that Kathleen and I put together cover all of New York's watersheds. But this issue, I think, resonates with people around the world, really. And plastic pollution is everywhere, and we're a part of it, and we're the solution. So it's great to see the reach and the participation that we have here in New York, in the Great Lakes, Texas, California, Virginia. Really great group with us today. So thank you for coming, and I hope that you enjoy the webinar. So now we're going to go into the curriculum itself. Its overall structure is divided into 3 units, 5 lessons in each unit, and we're going to go through each unit real briefly to talk about each lesson and some of the main points that people will be able to get from the activities. When you see the lessons, you'll notice that they all have a similar structure, but different content and activities. And there's also an appendix at the end where we'll go through the different resources that are in there. But we certainly didn't invent the first educational resource around plastic pollution or marine debris. There's a lot of great work that's been done out there that was inspiring to us, and we wanted to add to that. So we included a lot of other resources at the end that you can pair with this resource. You can mix and match. There's a lot of great stuff because, like I mentioned, it's a huge issue. So definitely want to recognize all the great work that's been done out there and hope that we offered some new stuff to that.
So each of these lessons this is kind of what the first page of each lesson looks like. And you'll see that each of them have a recommended grade level and an estimated time to complete. These are estimates and just recommendations. Feel free to adapt it to your classroom, of course. We really tried to make this curriculum as flexible as we could and provide lots of suggestions and different opportunities to maybe bring it up grade levels or bring it down grade levels. And again, the recommended time is just our estimate. You can obviously build upon it or shorten them. We also developed this program through this curriculum through the COVID pandemic. So we also hope that it translates pretty well into a virtual setting and also a classroom setting. We also worked with a teacher to have learning standards added to each lesson. So you will see that at the bottom. You see the pop out here. I believe all of the lessons except for the first one, which is kind of more of an introductory lesson, has various learning standards associated with it. We also have as you'll see in the curriculum, each unit is color coded with the 3 different units. And then we have our lesson title, a quick overview. We have the materials that we might need. We have a section for you to add notes as you're reading through it and have ideas of how you want to implement the lesson. And then we have step-by-step instructions. There's different things in these instructions that range from additional resources and discussion points all the way through to the actual walking through the activities that are associated with the lessons. And it is currently the curriculum is digital. So you are able to link and jump to either different lessons in the curriculum and also different links to resources on the internet that we think would be helpful.
Okay, so now we're gonna jump in to each unit and give you a quick overview. And like Kathleen mentioned, the curriculum is digital, and you'll get a link at the end of the webinar to download a copy. So you'll be able to click on everything, and if you ever find a link that doesn't work, let us know and we can update it. We've checked all the links multiple times, but the internet changes, so we'll keep up to speed on that. But the first unit is the one that kind of lays the foundation around this issue of plastic pollution. And it starts with a foundational lesson just to get students thinking about plastic in a way that they probably don't. We're surrounded by plastic. We all use it every day. But when was the last time you really sat down and thought about, what is this material and why is it so pervasive everywhere? What are the characteristics of it that we use it for so many things, which can be great. It's light, it's durable, but can also be bad when it gets in the environment. It's durable, it's light. So that's what that first lesson around activating knowledge on plastic focuses on. It uses KLW chart with knowledge, wonder, and learn. So what students already know, what questions they might have, and then what they learn. The second lesson moves into plastic pollution from full life cycle. And it features a TED Talk from Van Jones that talks about some of the social implications of plastic from its production through its disposal. And that these items aren't just neutral kind of in our experience as individuals. The way we use them, the way they're produced has a lot of cost. So it puts that human component into this discussion as well. The next lesson, lesson 1.3, focuses on individuals' use of plastic. And that plastic isn't just a one singular material. There's 6 different types, and then that one random catch-all that you'll hear more about in our guest speaker's presentation. But there's a lot of different things that go into plastic, and they make up different items. They're used differently, and they can be recycled differently. And this will connect to a lesson in a later unit about recycling in our communities. Lesson 1.4 focuses on plastic pollution, not just in our personal use, but in our communities. And I'll be leading a breakout room on this activity later, but it's, in a nutshell, a litter collection, a trash cleanup with a geographic and spatial analysis component to think about where trash is generated, where it accumulates, and start moving participants towards a solution focus where they can start brainstorming ideas of, okay, what are we going to do about this? And then the last lesson focuses on developing a position, a personal position around plastic pollution, and not in just an opinion way, but a well-researched, factually based position, so that it has students doing real research to find reputable sources, putting together their position and backing it up. So kind of focusing on some of the communication side. And so these activities, it's not just science, there's some social studies elements and some English elements and a lot of interdisciplinary stuff. So this unit hopefully lays the foundation for what we move into in the next 2.
My cursor. So the second unit focuses on plastic reduction and how we can reduce plastic pollution. You know, during this unit, students will learn how to use different tools to reduce the impact of plastic pollution in the environment and their communities. Lesson 2.1 is about recycling in your community, during which students will learn about which plastic items are recyclable in their local community, and also have a discussion about creating alternative or new products to use in place of non-recyclable items. Lesson 2.2, spotlight on a scientist. Again, students will read several articles written by and watch a TED Talk video of our guest speaker, Dr. Sherri Mason, and then answer questions related to what they learned. Lesson 2.3 is plastic pollution policies. And in this lesson, students will learn about different forms of public policies that communities have used to address plastic bag pollution. And then they will research proposed or implemented policies in their own communities and answer some guided questions related to that. Lesson 2.4 is another one that will be highlighted in our breakout groups. Jimena will be leading that breakout where you will learn about creating your own outreach campaign. And in that one, the students will read about how in 2020, New York State banned plastic bags, and how New York State used communication tools to educate the public on the new policy. And then they will take what they learned, and use creative thinking to develop their own outreach communication tool that will educate whatever target audience that they choose about the policy and encouraging using reusable bags. And the last lesson in this unit is a public hearing on plastic pollution policy. And this is kind of a role play. It is a role play lesson where students will work together to hold a community meeting where they each will represent various community members, such as council members, store operators, plastic bag manufacturers, news reporters. And they will talk about the various benefits or pros and cons and have to work as a community to discuss this, the potential of banning plastic bags, and what ultimately decide what their community is going to do based on their role play. So it's basically after Unit 2, students will really learn more about what is and what is not recycled in their own community, how scientists are studying the issue, and various public policy and outreach campaign strategies.
Okay, and then the final unit is where plastic pollution and water come together. You know, this is a sea grant resource, so we have to have the sea and the water in there. So this is where the idea of marine debris and aquatic trash and how this plastic that we see in our neighborhoods and in our streets ends up in our waters, whether that's a tributary, a Great Lake, or the ocean, or Long Island Sound too. Can't forget you guys, Long Island. Even though I'm here in the Great Lakes. I'm excited to come to Long Island in July. It's the first time I've ever been there. But Unit 3. So this one I like a lot because there's some good hands-on activities in there, and some different topics, some engineering ideas, and really creative activities that students can get involved with. So the first one is kind of an adaptation of a basic watershed model exercise, but with the specific focus on plastic pollution within that watershed. So it's introducing the concept of a watershed to students where everything flows together, but using plastic as the pollution that's moving through it. Lots of teachers or educators may have done this for other types of pollution, sediment runoff, nutrient pollution, lots of things, but this has a specific plastic focus within that activity. Lesson 3.2, that's another one of our breakout groups later that Lily's going to be leading. And this focuses on plastic pollution as in the wastewater treatment system. And the activity features a hands-on experiment with different size filters and different size particles to kind of replicate the idea of what can and cannot be filtered out within the wastewater treatment process. Lesson 3.3, Kathleen will be doing a breakout room on that one. And that focuses on the communication side of this issue with balloons as the key issue or the key plastic pollution in that activity. So balloons, as well as the strings that go along with them, are common marine debris entanglement items. So whether that's marine mammals or seabirds, balloons and the associated strings can cause a big issue there. So this activity focuses on doing research, putting together a compelling argument to Parker's Party Place, which you'll find out if you're in that breakout room, is a business that focuses on balloons. So how do you deal with that type of communication around this issue? Lesson 3.4 uses trash capture technologies as the focus to get kids thinking about engineering concepts and creative approaches to capturing plastic pollution before it gets in the wastewater system and the sewers. So there's some examples of different devices that have been implemented across the country at storm drains, within sewer systems, to kind of capture plastic pollution before it gets into the wastewater system or into our streams and rivers. So it has kids brainstorm ideas about what type of technologies or devices they could use in their communities to capture plastic pollution, and think about what would go into it. How would you manage it? How would you build it? The pros and cons, lots of things like that. And then 3.5 is kind of the wrap-up lesson where we ask participants to put together an action plan about how they could address this issue in their community. And we got a lot of inspiration from this from some of the existing action plans around marine debris that NOAA's put together in the Great Lakes, on Long Island, and in different parts of the country. So it's about bringing together different stakeholders and interested parties, understanding what tools that we have and how we can work together to reach a common goal. So that, we hope, is kind of a nice capstone activity. And we'd love to hear, if people implement those ideas, what kind of action plans students come up with. And all of these activities, if you implement them, feel free to email us. Our addresses will be at the end of the presentation, because we're always interested to see how they're used and adapted for different classrooms and programs.
Okay, and then just super quickly, Nate already mentioned this, we have an appendix at the end. And basically this is everything else in the curriculum. We have a really great map of New York State in there. We have additional material, additional resources that are both things to read about, different articles and things to read about, as well as a list of other curriculums that are out there. We have our standards descriptions, and then we have a lesson that had the outreach campaign that Jimena will be talking about later. If you're in that breakout group, we have just more templates ranging from buttons to shirts to Facebook posts. So we have all of the templates added into the appendix. And then, of course, we have included a certificate of completion that can be printed out as a PDF. So you can type in your students' names and have them printed out and to hand out to the students if they complete this curriculum. So that is a quick overview of the curriculum. And I'm going to switch over now to our guest speaker, Dr. Sherri Mason.
Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to get to be part of this launch event. Let's see, can everybody see my screen? And let me do that. Can y'all see it? Yeah, okay.
Yep, looks good.
Thank you. Good. Well, it's such an honor to be part of this event. Love New York Sea Grant, in part because y'all gave me money, and in part because of the great people that work there. And really excited to see more and more kind of outreach, education materials around this topic. So kind of as the curricula does, I'm going to start with this kind of basic question about, what exactly is plastic? I may be speaking to the choir here, but it's always good to be reminded. So, the basic kind of starting material for plastic is a polymer. Sometimes it's the main component, as in it takes up more than 50% of the mass, but it's not always true. Sometimes it's only 30% of actually the mass of a particular plastic item, and we'll talk about what makes up the rest in a little bit. But that is, if you're looking to define plastic, it is a man-made material, a synthetic or semi-synthetic material, polymeric material. That's kind of the ultimate definition. For students, I like to really kind of connect it back to a train. What a polymer is, right? So a polymer is this long molecule, kind of like a train is this long, contraption that's made of these individual identical units that are linked together. It's the same idea with a polymer. It is a long chained molecule that's composed of these monomers that are linked together, like the way the cars of a train are linked together to make the train. So here I'm showing, ethylene being turned into polyethylene, right? That same kind of idea. And then the polymer is ultimately, that's rotating on the wrong thing, what leads to these resin identification codes that you see on the bottom of many plastic items. One thing I always like to be really clear about, I love to talk about these resin identification codes because of the fact that, they typically compose, if not a triangle, it's usually chasing arrows. And because of that, I've had many people tell me that means it can be recycled. No, it doesn't. And I think that that's really an important point to make. It is simply part of the resin identification code. It basically, it was, taken as part of this coding system created by the industry. But the fact that those are chasing arrows does not actually mean that these items can be recycled, which really kind of calls to the importance of that. What can you recycle in your own community lesson plan that's included in this New York Sea Grant curriculum? So in most communities, you can actually only recycle ones and twos at best. PVC, polystyrene, you can never recycle. They're just not recyclable plastics. So the numbers tell you about the polymer that is in that particular plastic item if it's coated. But even when you have two plastic items that have the same resin identification code at the bottom, they're not necessarily the same plastic. And that gets back to that point we made a minute ago that, while polymer is the necessary component in the plastic, it's not always the main component. To make plastics moldable, we mix in plasticizers to keep them stable. We add in UV stabilizers. We add in colorants so we can have plastics in every color of the rainbow. We add in flame retardants and a myriad of other additives. And so, even two plastics that have the same resin identification code, because of all of these different chemicals that can be mixed in, they're considered two different plastics. And so, there's really thousands of different plastics that are on the marketplace. And that's why recycling of this material is so incredibly difficult, just because of the sheer kind of size of the problem. So that is, what plastic is, right? The problem with regard to its release into the environment is the fact that plastics, are not considered biodegradable. There are technically organisms, just in case you have one of some kid who's been spending a lot of time on Facebook recently, and he's like, but I saw a Facebook post. There are some microorganisms that can use plastic as a food source, but they are not prominent in the external environment. Many of them have been genetically modified, so they're man-made, created. And for this reason, plastics are not considered biodegradable, right? So unlike a paper bag that would become mineralized within weeks, plastics do not degrade in that kind of a time frame, and instead go through a breakage kind of mechanism. They basically largely degrade through mechanical as opposed to chemical means. So sunlight makes the plastics brittle, and then mechanical abrasion like wind and water and cars driving over them act to cause the plastics to break into ever smaller pieces, but very little is happening in terms of the chemistry. Another point that I like to make, and that is included in this lesson plan, is the fact that plastic, though, doesn't just pollute at the end of its life. Plastic is polluting from the moment it is extracted, right? Those monomers that make up the polymer ultimately come from the fossil fuels. And so in that whole process of just extracting the fossil fuels, they're already starting to pollute. The refining has, refineries typically are built in communities of color, low income communities, and they have a real impact there, right? In areas like the Cancer Alley down along the Gulf of Mexico. From there, what is actually formed in the refinery are these little plastic pellets, otherwise known as nurdles, that are shipped to some kind of facility where they're fabricated. Every one of those transfers allows for these pellets to be lost to the external environment. And so that's another place where they are polluting. And then those products are then shipped, to the people for use and reuse. And then this is kind of really where we think of the pollution happening, right? We tend to focus in on pollution happening after people, but really pollution is happening all along this chain. And I just think that that's a really important piece to make, especially with regard to kind of environmental justice issues. This topic really did start in the world's oceans and these 5 oceanic gyres. But since 2004, it's been pretty well known that as we move upstream from the oceans, this plastic is making its way into oceans through freshwater systems. This is actually a river right here in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I live. And you can see the plastic that's making its way down that river into Lake Erie. And so it really is making its way through freshwater systems like the Great Lakes that we live on. Some numbers that you might find interesting. So in terms of the average amount of plastic that we find floating on the surface of the Great Lakes, up in Lake Superior, we find an average of 30,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometer. The very start of the Great Lakes chain, least densely populated of the Great Lakes, and we're already finding 30,000. When you move into Lake Huron, that increases up to 46,000. Lake Michigan currently has the lowest average at 17,000. I think that's partially just because we need more data. And probably, these two, geologically speaking, Huron and Michigan are one lake. So the real average here is probably somewhere in between these two, just slightly higher than what we see up in Lake Superior. When we move then into Lake Erie, that goes up to 160,000. It's a dramatic increase, kind of staggering. And a big reason behind that probably is the fact that Lake Erie has it's the most densely populated of any of the Great Lakes. So we have more people living in the Lake Erie watershed than they do in the other lakes, and so I think you see that in the counts. And then it goes up to a kind of a staggering 250,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometer in Lake Superior. So when you account for the lake surface sizes, we have somewhere between 1 billion and 5 billion pieces of plastic within each of the individual Great Lakes, totaling somewhere around 15 billion particles across the entire 5 Great Lakes. 97% of those plastics are what we call microplastics. So these particles that are less than 5 millimeters in size. And I think this is an important point to make because, people can go out to the lake and say, well, I don't see it. What are you talking about? I don't see the plastic out there. And it's because it really is kind of a confetti. It's a smog of plastic that's immersed within the water. And so it's not always really visible. Some of these plastics are primary microplastics, that is things that were designed to be micro size. So these are those pre-production plastic pellets that I say get shipped from a refinery to a fabrication facility. Microbeads would also be in this category. Most of what we find are secondary microplastics, so things that broke down from something that were much larger, like microfibers coming off your clothes or fragments that break from a larger plastic item through that photo oxidative degradation process that we talked about earlier. We tend to categorize the morphology of plastics that we find, fragments being generally the most common, although fibers and lines in certain situations do become actually more prominent, especially when you're talking about air samples. That's largely, you find fibers. Fish largely contain fibers. So certain environmental samples, you'll find fibers more preferentially as compared to other morphologies. In the lower Great Lakes, Lake Erie and Lake Superior, second to fragments are actually the pellets. So either these pre-production plastic pellets that we were talking about are nurdles, or those microbeads coming from personal care products. Why do we care? Why does this matter? Why does it matter that there's plastic in our water? We could, we could spend a lot of time just answering this question, but I really wanted to focus in on some kind of recent headlines that I think kind of drive the point home, right? What you find in the water comes back to us, right? We are as much water as the planet is. And if it's in the water, it's in us. And it's not just that we're eating it, right? But we're passing it on to our young. If you hadn't heard about the placental boundary study, it's quite fascinating. It was found on both sides of the placental boundary, both the maternal side and the fetal side. So there's no doubt it's making its way across that placental boundary and making its way into our children. So those are some interesting headlines from last year. And then in just the last 2 weeks, right? I think it was 3 weeks ago, microplastics were found in human blood for the first time. And then just last week, the announcement of this study showing that microplastics were found in the lungs of living people. And specifically, what really surprised the authors of this study was the fact that they were found deep in the lungs. They were surprised that they hadn't been filtered out at kind of the upper parts of the lung, but that they had made it into the deepest kind of recesses of the lungs, really kind of showing how omnipresent, right, these are, and how they just pervasive. They're just really, really difficult to filter out. So what can you do? Well, you can teach these lessons, right? That's why you're all here, is to engage students in understanding more, and through understanding, hopefully pushing for the changes that we need to see, both at the personal level, but also, pushing them to kind of be engaged at higher levels, pushing corporations to make changes, pushing governments to create regulations, I think is really important part of this. But it all starts with education, right? Anytime you have an addiction, the first thing you have to do is admit that you have a problem. So the last thing that Nate asked me to talk about, hopefully I'm still allowing enough time for questions here at the end, but Nate had asked me to talk a little bit about my experience having given a TED Talk, because I think one of the lesson plans has students kind of prepping, or one of the outcomes is that students can make their own kind of TED Talk. So he wanted me to talk a little bit about that process. I think that the starting point of prepping for the TED Talk was, the content is important, but you have to have the hook. And so really, thinking about in the first, 2 minutes of this presentation, what are you going to say that's going to make people want to listen further? What's your hook? And then coming back to that at the end. So, I attempted to make it clear in my presentation that I was, wanted to get people to reevaluate their relationship with this material. And here's why. And then I came back to it at the end. What I'm really asking you to do is to make changes in your life, because what we find in the water ultimately comes from us as people. And so really kind of thinking out that process, there was a lot of practicing in Thunder Bay, and I had to present to them. I presented obviously to my friends, my colleagues, and got feedback from them. Involved even my IT in helping me create some better looking graphics, though they didn't show up in the TED Talk that you see online very well, but that's a whole other topic. But there was a lot of time involved in this whole process, and then memorizing it, and you see that actually, if you watch my TED Talk, you'll see that I bobbled at the beginning of it. But I caught myself really quickly. I was like, no, it hadn't been 6 years. It had been 10 years. That's what I meant to say. But practicing so that you have it memorized. There are people who give TED Talks and have notes in front of them, but I personally find that very distracting and really encourage students to memorize these things and not have items. And I'm happy to answer any other kind of questions about that. But I do want to make sure we have time for questions. So I want to thank you all for your time, for listening to me, and then let's open it up for questions.
Thanks, Sam. And, I've watched your TED Talk multiple times and I didn't remember that you babbled at all. So no worries at all. I think
That was a good experience to go through that, for sure.
Yeah. And that TED Talk is featured in lesson 1.5 and 2.2. So the links are in there. And I think it's a great activity. And, in my mind, I envision students across the state and the country giving talks like this to their classes, their communities, and just working on that public speaking and communication part of it that's so important with science communication. So that's our hope. But now if people have questions, feel free to use the chat. You should be able to unmute yourselves as well. We're not a huge group, so I don't think we'll talk over each other too much. But anyone have any questions?
There was something that came up in the chat. Oh, okay. It just said, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I'll say hi to my friends. I see Kathy here. I see Mike Jabot here. I saw Lauren. Yeah, Lauren from Save the River. Thank you guys for being here.
Sam. I can break the ice with questions. I do have one. You mentioned in your presentation, like just in passing, when you were talking about how there's pollution that happens at every piece of the production line. You made a comment about how this is especially relevant when it comes to communities with EJ concerns. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, absolutely. So if you're not aware, along the Gulf Coast of the United States, there is a high proportion of refineries, and specifically the ones in Louisiana, although growing up in Texas, I always heard it applied to the entire kind of Gulf Coast as being labeled Cancer Alley, because the citizens who live around these refineries have higher incidence of very specific types of cancer. And so, and there's some great people actually that we could, put people in contact with that work in those communities. So the largest refinery in the United States, I think is the name of it is Port Arthur, but it's located technically in Texas, just outside of Houston. And there's great images of it online in terms of, just to give you an idea of the scale. It's the second largest in the world. It's the largest in the United States. And when I bring up images of it for my classes, I always say, what's missing in this image is the fact that there's a boys and girls club just to the west of it, and over to the to the east is a little kids playground, and don't forget the communities that bought houses. And when they bought these houses, in the 60s and 70s, you couldn't even see this facility because it was 2 miles away. And this facility has just grown bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where they're now right across the street. And so who's going to buy that house so that they can move to a better community? Nobody. And so there's just so much that misses from those pictures, and really trying to get people to think about the people who live in these communities and are exposed. So when I see a bottle of water, those are the people I picture, and if somebody sees me and they're drinking a bottle of water, they're always like, oh, sorry, Sam, sorry. And I'm just like, you don't have to be sorry to me. Be sorry to that kid who has to breathe the air that's coming out of, the Port Arthur refinery. That's who you need to be sorry to, and should this seem like it's too far away from us living up where we live? Well, no, it's not, because there's a great Guardian article entitled, "Will the push for plastics to push Appalachia to be the next Cancer Alley?" And if you're not aware, there's a, I know in New York, y'all were smart enough to ban hydrofracking. However, in Pennsylvania, we are all about it. Right. And so we are doing a lot of hydrofracking, and hydrofracking, I think most people kind of associate it with producing methane, which is natural gas and is used for energy. But a lot of the wells that are drilled here in Pennsylvania actually produce what is called wet gas. And that it's called that because it has higher proportions of ethane and propane. And as a consequence is not really good for energy. And instead, there's a build out happening. There's a facility being built currently from Shell in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. So just north of Pittsburgh, closer to the Ohio, it's on the Ohio River. It will be operational, they say, by the end of this year. And it's called a cracker plant. So it's the Beaver County cracker plant. And the point of this facility is to take this wet hydrofracked gas and turn it into polyethylene and polypropylene. So they take this, ethane, turn it into ethylene, and then turn that into polyethylene. And they take the propane and turn it into propene and turn that into polypropylene, and then ship those pre-production plastic pellets or nurdles to other communities like Erie to be turned into various plastic products. There are two sister facilities being planned just over the border in Ohio. So there's a build out happening right here in our neck of the woods that is all around taking hydrofracked gas and turning it into plastic, so this is extremely relevant here, and it's going to be affecting the kids in the little communities that are in our region of the world. There's no doubt about that. And I think bringing that to light is really important. This isn't just an end of life thing. It's a beginning of life thing, and every single step of the way. So I'm I think I spent longer answering that question than I did on the whole presentation, but hopefully that was helpful, Jimena.
It was super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and Kim, I think, unmuted at one point and then muted. So Kim, do you have a question?
I was just wondering, I will teach pre-calculus next year, and I was wondering if there's any, I'm always trying to look up like an exponential growth, like how to apply these lessons about the growth of plastics, but it's kind of hard to find data that's easy to work with. And I wondered if you had any suggestions of or resources for the upper level classes, especially upper level math.
Roland Geyer at University of California, Santa Barbara. I'll put this to everyone. Let's see, Roland Geyer at UCSB. He look up his website, and he has these great graphics on his website showing the exponential growth, but I'm pretty sure he has the data available for download too. And so you can have students like integrate under the curve, to get the fact that we've produced 10 billion metric tons of this material in 70 years. It's kind of staggering. 10 billion metric tons, by the way, is the equivalent of 1 million Eiffel Towers. That's a lot of material.
Thank you.
Sure. Do you have a question, Nate? I saw you unmute.
That question just reminded me about the one time we were talking, Sam, and how you would quantify the amount of microplastics that could come from a plastic bottle, and how we need to develop a math lesson around that. And I'm not a mathematician, but I just think that would be a really powerful way to use math to talk about this issue.
Yeah, no, that's, Matt Hoffman would be great at RIT, would be great to reach out to, because I know that, he takes basically, they have these like averages on how much a a piece of plastic weighs, and then, because we tend to talk in particles, like numbers of particles. Well, what does that mean in terms of mass? And, the current number for the Great Lakes is 10,000 tons of plastic enter the Great Lakes every year. So to make that connection, he used some kind of average weight of a plastic particle, right? In order to take a particle into a mass kind of unit. And so that would be a great kind of great math lesson plan. Even just have students weigh like an empty bottle. And then how many empty plastic bottles is 10 billion metric tons, that's some massive extrapolations there. But I mean, it's going to be an insanely huge number. How many Olympic sized swimming pools? I remember I wrote an article for American Scientist, and they wanted me, and I forget what number I came up with, but look up the article and you can see, but they were like, okay, so that's a really big number. How many Olympic sized swimming pools is that? And I was like, I don't know. Let's do a rough calculation here. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of math, I think, that could be involved in this. Yeah. How many Olympic sized swimming pools is that?
Medically speaking, like, are doctors seeing, 'cause I know the plastics are like little toxic sponges. Since they're finding plastics in humans, have they been able to relate that to certain illnesses yet, like as far as the microplastics being consumed?
No, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure we ever really will. I mean, there will always be a way for industry to say maybe, but maybe not. There'll always be a way for industry to kind of spin it a little bit. And the reason is, what did I show in the PowerPoint, right? We're being exposed before we're even born. So how are you going to know that when you got breast cancer at the age of 40, it was because of plastic that you were exposed to? When you've been exposed to plastic before you were even born, how do you make those connections, those direct connections? We are exposed, we're born with over 300 different synthetic chemicals in our body, not even including plastic, right? I mean, these were studies that were done before kind of plastic pollution was really a hot topic. Over 300 different synthetic chemicals in our bodies when we're born. So there's just really no way to make a connection between one particular chemical you were exposed to and some illness that you get 40 years later. So it just makes it extremely difficult to make those connections. And so that's kind of the what industry can use to kind of constantly say, well, but you don't know that was plastic, so it's always a little bit of what we can show in laboratory studies is that, exposure to plastics, in rats leads to X, Y, or Z. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's, and then you can make inferences, but that's as much as we can really do. And so that always kind of leaves this space for questioning and skepticism and, which is unfortunate, but we do know that, kind of the rises in synthetic chemicals, many of which are associated with plastics production, many of which are endocrine disruptors, seem to correlate well with rises in certain types of cancer, decreases in sperm counts, more difficulty in conceiving and maintaining a pregnancy, as well as ADHD and even obesity in children under the age of 6 months. With regard to the sexual reproduction, there's a great book called Countdown by Dr. Shauna Swan. She came out a year ago. Try to type at the same time. It's a great book. that talks about this, and she has an entire chapter on plastics and its connection to reproductive issues on both the male and female side. So not just sperm counts going down, but women are not as we can't get pregnant for as long as we used to. The window that we can is narrowing. The ability to maintain, if it seems like you're hearing more about women having miscarriages, it's not just because we're talking about it more. We're really having more miscarriages. It's like we are. So this, whole Handmaid's Tale is not so much science fiction. It's slowly becoming science fact. And there's definitely a connection to plastics with that. This is not a happy conversation that I'm having.
That we just got a question in the chat that does address that. And we have a few more minutes before we go to our breakout rooms. But the question was around when there's so much scary, negative information happening, how do you prevent kids from feeling completely helpless? And how can we not keep the focus, but also have focus on solutions and balancing some of this really serious stuff with it's not completely hopeless.
Right.
And we try to do that a bit in some of the activities, but I'd love to get your thoughts too, Sam.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say is be engaged, right? Get them engaged, like in, the way that we solve things in, the United States and the Western world is through regulation, it's through activism, it's through education. And so getting them engaged in that process, that gives you the hope, right? And also, there are a lot of issues, out there in the world. You don't have to solve them all, so find an issue that means something to you and make that your issue. So obviously for me, it's plastic pollution. I'm not on a daily basis working on climate change or harmful algal blooms or, a myriad of other issues. I'll do my best to connect plastic pollution to these like I do with environmental justice. I don't spend that. That's not, the focal point of what I do. The focal point of what I do is plastic pollution, but I connect it to other issues as I can to bring awareness to those as well. But that becomes my focus. And then I know that other people are working on the other issues and you try and understand that it's not all me. It's not all on my shoulders. It's a group effort. It took us years to get to this point. It's going to take us time to get out. But we've done things, humans are amazingly resilient. And so you kind of look back on that and hope to have faith. But the most important thing is to be engaged. And if you're not engaged, then that doesn't give you an outlet. You need to be engaged so you have that outlet. That you feel like you're contributing to a solution. And each one of us is, even if your only contribution is when you go out, you say, I don't want that straw. That's an action. That's an engagement. And I can tell you, because I picked the straws out of the storm drains this morning, that refusing a straw makes a huge freaking difference. So, these little actions, we need those happening at the same time that things are happening in terms of legislation and regulation. You need this happening on all of these different levels. So getting students engaged in that process and giving them some autonomy to figure out what their engagement is. I was talking with a bunch of teachers, and they were, leading these beach cleanups, and they were like, okay, now what do we do? And I was like, I don't know, you've got a lot of trash, send it back to the companies who it belongs to. And they were like, oh my God, that's the best idea. So I think they sent a bunch of stuff back to Coca-Cola and Pepsi and, and took the clamshells to the grocery store and just like, we don't want your plastic. Here you go. It's yours. It's not mine. You know, so whatever they decide, you know, kind of help them to approach it in a you know, civil way, right? We're not gonna do storming any capitals, none of that stuff, you know, but you know, kind of getting them engaged in that process, I think is great.
Hey, I have a question. Hi, Sarah Ankel. Hey, Suffolk County Legislator. I just want to thank everybody for their advocacy. Of course, I put in the chat, and working with Kathleen over here on Long Island to try to get out a curriculum for the different school levels, elementary, middle school, even high school, because that's it's all about the future, and and it's the children educating the parents. Because I heard a survey that one of the top priorities in a young adult's life, whatever, it's environment. You don't hear that from older adults. Of course, I'm a little on the older adult side. I have 20+ year old kids. My daughter just turned 30, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the first part of the meeting. Can you send me the link because it looks like it's being recorded so I can see your presentation? I apologize. But Dorothy, my chief of staff, actually was here and we just switched off. So again, I just want to thank everybody, and Kathleen, I guess we'll be in touch to try to get to do the press event and try to get people aware that there's a wonderful curriculum available, and it also qualifies for points with the education system here in New York State. So that's good. And one other thing, I'll take up, I know I have my official background here, but I'll take off my legislative hat. Soon to publish a children's book called Below the Ocean, Keeping Our Sea Friends Safe. I'm working with an illustrator and we're hoping to publish that, just Amazon, getting it out probably in the next couple of weeks, but I will keep you guys aware. Kathleen, I guess, will reach out to you guys. But again, it's about something that I experienced even before I was a legislator. And before I was a legislator, by the way, I started a not-for-profit called Community Health and Environment Coalition. And it was because there was so much cancer and breast cancer in this area. And it was basically advocating the link between our environment and our health. And what's crazy right now is like 20 years later, this was 20 years ago, I was doing this, and people were like, oh, go away, Sarah, yeah, right. Now with 9/11, they get it. The police officers, the first responders, they understand now. And it's a shame it took so long, and for that situation to happen. But, again, let's all keep on moving this mountain, because I know we can always make things better. So again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right, Nate, I think we're going into breakout rooms, right?
We're headed into the breakouts now. Thanks. Whoops. Am I sharing the wrong screen? That's a giant picture of my face, isn't it?
And your son.
And my son, yeah.
Most importantly, all I saw was your son.
He's a cool one. I did it again. Which screen do I have? This is why you don't have two screens, everybody. Well, you know why? All right. Well, while I'm getting that set, sorry, everybody. Thanks, Sam, for that presentation. I think plastic pollution, for me, I won't say one of my favorite things about it, but how relatable it is to students and adults. It's something that we all interact with and we all see. And I can see that as a launching point to some of those bigger topics that may seem overwhelming, or we can't do everything, but if we work on plastic pollution, it can start giving us that energy and that confidence to work on other things. So with that said, we're going to break up into our breakout groups. Kathleen is going to assign everybody to different groups. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll have 4 different groups for about the next 20 minutes or so. We'll walk through each of the activities, and we can take ourselves off mute. We can talk, because I'd love to get feedback from everyone on if you've done something similar or how you'd like to use that in your classrooms or programs. So we can go ahead and launch those breakouts.
Hey, Nate, real quick, I also want to thank you. I'm sorry, I don't recognize all the people on this call for all the work that this is the program, right, Kathleen? This is it?
This is the big launch, yeah.
This is, and just so you know, I proposed legislation a couple years ago, and I was working with Stony Brook to do exactly what you guys have done. So again, I want to thank you. And also, just so you know, Eastern Suffolk BOCES, Western BOCES, they can put this on their site and they can provide that for teachers. And I will be so happy to advocate to get those teachers to use this curriculum. This is going to be wonderful. So I have to go now. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to leave you, but I'm sure you guys will keep me updated on your wonderful project here. And again, thank you everybody for all the work that you're doing.
One last thought before we break out too. Immediately after the webinar, there'll be an email that will have the link that'll go out to everyone that was registered. So you guys will get that with a survey as well, so we can get your thoughts. So everyone will have access within an hour. Hope your breakout sessions went well. We had a really good conversation in ours about the activity and new ideas and sharing what we've all done and what we'd like to do. So any other thoughts or questions from the group or my fellow Sea Granters? Were your breakout groups as good as mine? Better, maybe?
Mine ran long, so I'm sorry to my breakout group, but I'm happy to touch base and send you the presentation. I've got some other ideas on there, so.
Same with mine. Sorry to leave the breakout room mid-sentence.
I really just kind of thrust us back in there. I didn't get a countdown, so I apologize on that one.
So yeah, the challenge of taking at least even at the quickest a 1 period lesson, some of them multi-day, and condensing it to 20 minutes. Tough challenge. But I'm sure there was good stuff shared. Thoughts from the group? If not, I can tell you about the email that you'll get right after this webinar.
I just want to say something. Is it Imena? Is that how you pronounce it? Imena?
Imena, yeah.
I just was in your group, and I know the lesson is designed for a 9 to 12 grader, but I could see doing something like that with my green team and their elementary 4th and 5th grade student. So like to adapt it for a younger grade. They're trying to create a logo for the green team and thinking of ideas. So seeing how you had it structured makes it easier for me to plan something out. So so that was good. Thank you.
Ooh, that's awesome. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Awesome. Okay, let me share my screen. Pull up our final slides. So following this webinar, you will get an email that has a survey for you to fill out, and that's how you will get the link to the plastic pollution curriculum. So it's a short survey just on your thoughts on the webinar, but also the resource and how we can stay in contact with you and potentially connect you with other teachers and educators working on this issue. And we'd love to hear from you. This is all of our emails. What worked, also what didn't, like what else can we provide or produce on this issue or other issues. And as I was telling my breakout group, I was already writing ideas during the webinar for future activities around this topic. So thank you for coming, and you'll be getting an email soon. And Kathleen, Lily, Jimena, final parting words.
Great to see everyone. Thanks, Nate. Great job.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us. And we're really excited to get this out there. And we definitely want to hear what you think.
I echo all that. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Great night.
Thank you.